She's heard that the malignance of mummies, especially museums, is incredible, and she thinks it a judgment that some of the most distinguished ones are going bad. She says it's spite. I say it's management. But I'm not ready to sit down yet. My wife means to start a society for the prevention of cruelty to mummies, with the object of sending them back to their tombs where they can rest in that state of death it pleased their gods to call them to. Their object was eternal privacy, and they spent more on their tombs than on their houses, because they expected to be dead a long time, and wanted all the comforts of home. But I judge mummies by myself. It wouldn't have taken me these thousands of years to realize how narrow and unchristian my notions had been. I should see that I owed some duty to the world, and as so much posterity has rolled by since my day, I'd feel that lying in a museum at some large place like Cairo was, after all, the only way to keep my name before the public. Now that brings me to my tip for Lord Ernest. He asks what there is we don't know, and want to know. I'll answer for us all, being used to feel the pulse of crowds. We want to know what the deuce ancient Egyptians really believed about death and religion. Had they any sense, or were they just plain fools? On the tide of applause which congratulated the boat's only baronet, I felt that I was on the crest of the wave, for the ancient religion of Egypt appeals to me, and, as I now had reason to hope that others were comfortably ignorant of my subject, I could spread myself as much as I pleased. The ancient Egyptians were far from being fools, I answered Sir John with the air of being in their confidence. We who are tempted to think so don't take the trouble to try the key of their faith in its door. I might say that its door was the door of the tomb. If we go through that door into the kingdom of Osiris, Amenti, which the Greeks renamed Hades, the mysteries which appear tangled sort themselves graciously out. The story of Isis, the great enchantress, and her search for the body of her husband Osiris, murdered by Set, his wicked and jealous brother, spirit of evil, is perhaps the most lovable legend of the world. But in hearing that Horus, the son of Isis, was really the same god as Osiris, modern ideas begin to get mixed and confuse themselves over Isis, goddess of love and goodness, cow-headed Hathor, mistress of love and joy, cat-headed Pasht and lioness-headed Sekhet, goddess of love and passion. There's hawk-headed Horus the youth, too, and Horus the child, represented in statues with his thumb in his mouth. How is one to make sense of them all? But once you have the key, it is easy and even beautiful. The esoteric, or secret religion known to the high priests and the instructed ones was different from the animal worship and adoration of bird-headed deities, which gave the common people such interest in daily life. They would have been lost without their monsters, and the priests would have been lost without the temple necessary for the worship of such a menagerie. For Egypt was a priest-ridden country in old days. The explanation of the many gods and goddesses was this: each was a different phase of the one god, Ra, the sun, by whom and through whom only the world could exist. Animals and birds were chosen to express the different phases, because animals were considered to be nearer nature, therefore nearer God, than human beings. Besides, to give the god the head of a man would not set him apart from humanity, as it would to make him appear with the body of a man and the head of some bird or beast. Horus finished off with the head of a hawk, that sacred bird who could look the sun in the face, became to the uneducated eye a supernatural being, which he would not have been with the face of a smiling youth. The child Horus, or Harpocrates, was not respected as was Horus of the hawk-head. He was merely petted and loved. Even Set, god of evil, wasn't all bad. He was the spirit of storm and strife in nature, and had to be propitiated by the ignorant. Typhon, or Typhoon, and he were one. Red was his color, and red-haired people were his children. There were 100 phases of the one God, each made incarnate, given his own mission, and worshipped in a different place. It's an ill wind of Set that blows nobody good, and animals had a gorgeous time in those days. Very few weren't sacred for some reason or other. It was death and destruction to kill a cat, and I don't think that cats have forgotten to this day the importance they had in Egypt. It's made them the most supercilious of animals. If Amun-Ra were angry, he could become Menthu, the war god. If he were inclined to be gentle, he could shrink to the dimensions of Horus, child god of the rising sun. If he were weary, he could rest as the old god Tum of the setting sun. Probably gods and goddesses never enjoyed themselves so much as in ancient Egypt, and though it does seem a drawback from our artistic point of view for Hathor to have the head or ears of a cow, for wise Thoth to have the long beak of an ibis, and so on, it was for them only an amusing kind of masquerade or tete party on the walls of the temples and tombs. At home they could be what they liked. Think how interesting for the Egyptians to have all these queer gods, and what variety it gave to their lives. Perhaps the priests really meant well in keeping the secret of the one God for themselves and the kings, as the people weren't fitted to bear its solemnity. Fancy how amusing it was for the children to be told, on silver bright nights, about Khonsu, god of the moon, always young, wearing the curled lock of the youth on his brow, who staked 5 nights of his light playing draughts with Thoth, father of magic. But he had a more serious phase, for when he was not a gambler he was an expeller of demons, a most popular accomplishment. Indeed, almost every god had several thriving businesses, conducted under different aliases. Khnum, the creator, dweller at the cataracts, is my favorite, and is still busy, as he looks after the rise and fall of the river. Heket, goddess of birth, was a pal of his in spite of her appalling ugliness, and she used to kneel by his potter's wheel. While he fashioned the clay she would hold the sign of life, so that spirit might enter into the formed body when Khnum got it to the right state. For very important babies, royal ones or geniuses, she held a sign of life in each hand, which made them extraordinarily vital. When you arrive in Egypt, the first thing you'll be asked to buy will be the sign, or key of life, in the shape of paper knives or brooches or what not, and it will be pointed out to you in tombs till you're sick and tired of it. You can buy Heket too, and funny old Bes, nurse goddess of children, quite the gollywig of her day, and all the other gods and goddesses will be offered to you, to say nothing of the kings who were entitled to worship themselves as gods if they wanted to. It's easy, you see, to make fun of ancient religion, and other nations did make fun of it. But to be serious, the priests were nearer right than it would seem, for they believed that God was all, that there was nothing in this or any universe which was not part of God. That note was my highest, and I stopped on it. Besides, I could think of nothing more to say. I ventured to sit down, and because the people were glad to hear the last of me, or because I had helped them finish their almonds and raisins, they applauded. Secretly I shook hands with myself, as the monkey must have done, when, with the cat's paw, he had pulled the hot chestnuts out of the fire. I had carefully selected my chestnuts, and waited until they were cool. Also, I had disappointed Colonel Corcoran. End of chapter 8.